Let's talk about fantasy sports and tax implications. In other words, how playing fantasy sports can affect your taxes. So here's an overview I want you to pay attention to here. Basically, when we talk about fantasy sports, we're talking about a lot of folks. In this country, we're talking about 50 to 75 million people join fantasy football leagues, for example, through hosting sites like DraftKings, Yahoo, ESPN, and FanDuel every single year. Can you imagine that? 50 to 75 million people. So just like the NFL draft, the fantasy draft allows you to pick and choose players from different positions and teams to put together the best team possible. Okay. And the thing here is that there are a lot of questions that revolve around paying taxes and taxation in general. So we're gonna ask a few questions. And answer them into this conversation. So, do you have to pay taxes on fantasy sports winnings? Yes. Income from fantasy sports is treated just like any other cash prize or gambling win. So you should report all net profit from playing fantasy football on your tax return, for instance. It can be fantasy anything though. It can be fantasy football, fantasy basketball, whatever. It can be anything. Now, how do you report fantasy sports winnings? Well, the major leagues typically send Form W-2G with all the information you will need to report winnings. However, depending on how your winnings are classified with the payer, you may receive Form 1099 miss. You can report winnings from a 1099 miss as other income on your tax return. And if your winnings are paid using a third-party platform like Venmo or PayPal, you may receive winnings reported on Form 1099K. And the payer will also send the same information to the IRS about your net profit, so make sure to report your winnings on your tax return. Ensuring your tax forms match IRS records will help to process your refund as quickly as possible. And that's what you want anyway. So what should you do if you didn't get a W-2G or let's say 1099 miss? If you do not receive a Form W-2G or 1099 miss from your fantasy sports host site, it does not mean you are free from tax liability. Very important. You will still be accountable for your income. It's always a great idea to keep track of your winnings to report them accurately on your tax return. The good thing is you can use Excel or you can use a lot of apps, a lot of third-party apps that allow you to track your winnings anyway. By the way, boss, welcome back to the show. It's really a pleasure to have you here. Make yourself comfortable. You are going to enjoy today's conversation. Now, there are a lot of people who ask questions about tax deductions for fantasy sports. Okay. Now, currently, there are no tax deductions for fantasy league winnings. And before 2018, you could write off the insurance fees under miscellaneous deductions. However, the tax laws changed under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and eliminated miscellaneous deductions like this one. So it's one of those things where you have to really ask yourself, first of all, are you playing on the side as a side player? Or are you a business? If you're a business, obviously there are certain deductions that you can actually take. But if you are just doing this as an individual, you do not qualify. There are no tax deductions for fantasy sports in this case. So can you claim gambling losses for fantasy sports? That's really another question, because if you're claiming profits, there should be, I would say, a proportional equivalent to claiming gambling losses, right? Let's answer that. Well, the general rule for claiming gambling losses is that you can never deduct more for losses than you report for income. So let's say if you win $1,000 and lose $1,500 in another league, your deduction is limited to just $1,000. You can't deduct your losses without reporting your wins. That's the bottom line here. The IRS just wants to make sure that if you are actually asking for benefits, that you actually are contributing something to the plate, so to speak. Also note that to report gambling losses, you must choose to itemize your deductions instead of taking the standard deduction. So if, let's say within a year, you realize that your itemized deduction are lower than your standard deduction, then you can't really claim gambling losses. Okay, it's one of those things where you have to always itemize. You always have to choose between itemized deduction and standard deduction to actually qualify. But the bottom line here is that there is a way to actually track your losses and winnings. Going back to what I said earlier, you can use the good old Excel, or you can just have an app. There are a lot of third-party apps that allow you to track your gambling winnings and gambling losses continuously. Plus, I want to quickly remind you of today's topic. We are having a conversation about fantasy sports and tax implications. One thing that I want to say clearly is that fantasy sports winnings of $600 or more are always reported to the IRS. Always. Okay, $600 or more. And so if it turns out that this is your lucky day and your take-home pay is a net profit of $600 or more for the year playing on websites such as DraftKings or FanDuel, the organizers have a legal obligation to send both you and the IRS a Form 1099 miss. If you receive your winnings through PayPal, the reporting form may be 1099-K, as I just said. So the 1099 tax forms report your winnings to the taxing authorities and also gives you information for completing your taxes. Even if you don't receive a 1099 form, you are still required to report all of your income on your federal and state income tax return. State. I want to be sure it's clear. Your state income tax is also in the loop here. So it's really important to understand that if you are able to actually have all of those transactions, then you have to make sure that you actually track things as you go along. Now, organizers typically calculate players' net profits using a formula. So fantasy sports organizers have to figure out players' net profits in order to determine who gets 1099 forms. They use a formula to determine when a player hits the $600 level. So this is prizes won minus entry fees plus bonuses equal net profit. Another way to calculate this is withdrawals plus year-end account balance minus deposits minus beginning year account balance equal net profit. We're going to put this on the screen so you can see it. Let me just go through it again. So the formula is prizes won minus entry fees plus bonuses equal net profit. Another way to calculate this is withdrawals plus year-end account balance in parentheses minus open parentheses deposits minus beginning year account balances close parentheses equal net profit. So in terms of reporting income or loss from fantasy sports on Form 1040, everything happens on Schedule 1. Okay, Schedule 1 for Form 1040 or as business income on Schedule C. Now let me talk about reporting income or losses from fantasy sports as business income. So the thing is that if you can establish that you play fantasy sports as a business, you can report your net profit as business income on Schedule C. So the great advantage to this is that you can typically report your losses as well. If you have a net loss for the year, you can use that loss to reduce other taxable income from jobs you hold or other businesses you run. And so the IRS typically allows you to claim fantasy sports as a business if you can convince them this is not a hobby and that you engage in fantasy sports regularly and treat it as a business activity with the intention of earning a profit. This is important. The intention of earning a profit. So the IRS may consider an activity to be a business if it earns a profit of at least 3 out of the last 5 years. So you got to really earn a profit at least 3 out of the last 5 years. Okay. So the bottom line here is that if you actually, if you want to report income or losses from fantasy sports as business income, you have choices between the forms you have to use to file your tax returns depending upon the legal setup that you have. So if you are, let's say, if you are a single member LLC, you have to actually file as because as a single member LLC, you are a disregarded entity. So you have to file Form 1040 and report your income or losses on Schedule C. If you are a multi-member LLC, you have to file Form 1065, and then you have to actually also have, you have to issue Schedules K1 to all the LLC members. If you are a C corporation, if you're filing as a C corporation, you have to actually, everything is happening at the corporation level. So basically, you report your income or losses on a Form 1120, and then you pay taxes at that level, and then you might actually have to pay taxes again on your personal tax return. If you file as an S corporation, you have to report your income or losses on your Form 1120S, and then you have to file your taxes later on while filing Form 1040 because you do not pay taxes at the company level. By the way, boss, I want to quickly remind you of today's topic. We are having a conversation about fantasy sports and tax implications. Let me go a little granular here. I want to really give you the details that you need to be aware of. So the question is, are fantasy sports winnings taxable? I think I've already answered the question. Yes. Okay. It is taxable. But the thing is that when we talk about taxability, we're speaking about minimum $600. Okay. I mean, the IRS is not really sort of like tracking everything and getting everything from you. Now, $600, that's really the minimum before you start getting a W2G or 1099 miscellaneous or 1099 whatever 1099 from all those websites. It's really important to understand that it's also your responsibility as a taxpayer, as a citizen, to track your earnings. Okay, so if those sites, if they make a mistake and they send you the wrong form or they fail to send you the form, you are still required to actually report whatever you have in your records on your tax return. Okay, it's really one of those things where you have to be also a participant, an active participant. But based on our research, it's just a lot better to actually set yourself up as a business. If you are going to if you are going to be involved in the fantasy sports, you can set yourself up as a business, even if you are not doing this full time. You can be a single member LLC, and basically this allows you to write off a lot of expenses that are tied directly to fantasy sports. Okay, I mean there are people who actually who really treat this as a real endeavor that can really help them out. And it's one of those things where you really want to be in a situation where you are writing stuff off. Okay. Let me remind you once again, the formula that those websites use to determine your net profit. So net profit equals winnings plus bonuses minus fees, or equal year-end balance plus withdrawals minus beginning of the year balance minus deposits. So those are the two formulas that they use to actually calculate fantasy sports net profit. And I want to talk to you about the fact that when we talk about fantasy sports and tax implications, remember that everything you are doing at the federal level, you are still required to actually report this also to your state authorities. So basically, it's one of those things where if you are going to be engaged in fantasy sports and you do this in multiple states, you want to actually report to your tax authorities. Now, there are instances where you are basically living in two places. If you are living in two places and participating in fantasy sports in multiple platforms, you need to file 3 tax returns. So this is one federal one and 2 state tax returns. So whatever you are domiciled, whatever states you are domiciled in, you need to file tax returns in that state. And it's one of those things where you have to always treat fantasy sports as a casino. You know, people go to casino and they actually gamble there, they actually play there, and and they make money or they lose money. It's the same thing. It's just the same thing. Okay. But the only difference here is that everything happens actually online. Okay. Because fantasy sports are basically and primarily done online via remote sort of means. So it's one of those things where the burden is on you to sort of track things a lot more. It's one of those things where you have to also ask yourself, what am I actually doing throughout the year? So basically, if I'm not playing, if I'm not doing anything, if I'm not making money, do I still have to file taxes? No. Okay, the minimum here is $600. If you make $300, if you make $200, you don't have to file taxes on that. You don't have to report anything for that year at least. $600 right now, as of the date of this show, is the minimum that the IRS wants to make sure that you make before you actually, report income, because for the IRS also it's a matter of tracking that income costs money. So they have to actually have a specific revenue threshold before actually engaging taxpayers. And bottom line here is that do track your winnings, do track your losses. Very, very, very important. Let me really close to this conversation by saying that basically, so I have already established that you must pay taxes on your fantasy sports winnings. But the question is, how much tax do you pay on those winnings? Well, if you win more than $600 playing fantasy sports, you will likely pay a flat 24% tax, 24%. Some fantasy sports sites and apps may even require you to file a W-9 so they can withhold 24% of your winnings for federal taxes. Okay, again, those are federal taxes because you might have to pay also at the state level. So it's one of those things where you are going to be in a situation where you are winning, or at least you are benefiting from the whole activity if you have set up your fantasy sports business. If you've set up your fantasy sports activity as a business. Okay, if you have it as a business, then really you can actually report everything, not a problem. But if you do not have it as a business, you can only claim as a loss what you have claimed as a profit. So that's what I gave you an example earlier. What I said, if you claim $1,000 as profits, you can only claim up to $1,000 as business losses. I mean, not business losses, as a loss in general. Okay, so you cannot say, you know what, I'm going to claim $1,000 in profits and I'm going to claim $10,000 or $5,000 in losses. It doesn't work that way. You can only offset what you have contributed into the IRS pot, and that makes sense. That really makes sense. It might sound a little weird, but I mean, at least our team will fully understand that because it has to be a fair system for everybody. So if you allow people to claim all kinds of expenses, this will be chaotic here. So the thing here is that, so just kind of recap here, you want to actually check your accounts, and if by January you do not receive any 1099K or J or whatever from those platforms, or you did not receive a W2 form, then you know something is really amiss. And it is your responsibility as a taxpayer to really ask questions and to report whatever discrepancies there are. Let's say there are just are not being fixed quickly. You can just basically inform the proper authorities of those things happening. Thank you so much for your attention. I really appreciate it. In today's conversation, we talked about fantasy sports and tax implications. I answered a few questions. I gave you the overview and the details. Thank you so much. God bless you. I'll see you next time. Until then, remember, stay marvelous.